about Kumeyaay culture, and also recognizing that Kumeyaay people and other native groups also have their own kind of ethnoscience. In other words, they have learned over thousands of years through empirical, observations, just learning and passing it on over the generations about every single plant, animal, every part of the natural world that scientists, the Western scientists, are just starting to begin to understand. And of course, Native people also have a very rich cosmology of stories about not only the land and every part of it, but the animals, the plants, which at the beginning of time were considered people. So let's see here now how I make this move forward. And so I think, part of our responsibility living here is to know whatever we can about the people and the plants that have been here long before we were, and to understand better what, the ways that plants have interacted for thousands of years. So I'm going to start with some background too about ethnobotany and the work that I've done with the Kumeyaay and other groups in Baja California, which is really part of the same bioregion as San Diego. But I also want to mention that one of the things that's maybe a little different and challenging about this talk for this group is that, imagine if you were trying to do gardening without a hose, without any irrigation, that all you could do is grow plants that were adapted to survive on whatever nature offers, whether that's, years of drought, years of rainfall, whatever it is. We have a whole set of plants that grow in the different ecosystems within an hour or so of San Diego and right where you live, that over thousands of years have adapted to this. And so rather than thinking about trying to find plants that will, like most gardeners, like we like to do, we take plants that we have to water and that give us nice, beautiful produce. In this case, it's learning about what the native plants of our region can provide for us. But as you'll see, often they require special processing. They're not like a tomato you can just pick off the vine and eat it. But people have learned over thousands of years how to do that processing. So it's a kind of a different approach. And I'm suggesting that you can probably have sort of a hybrid approach in your gardens. That's what I do with my garden, which is a xerophytic garden. Everything I have has to survive on practically no or just very minimal water. It's a fun challenge. And so I have a cohabiting of native and plants that are very low water plants from other parts of the world that are from similar Mediterranean climates or climates that have produced these different low water plants. So this is a story that starts a long time ago, longer than our lifetimes, longer than 1,000 lifetimes. It's a story that goes back to the beginning of time when everything was covered by ocean. Two brother beings lived under the ocean, and after millions of years of thinking and thinking, they began to create the earth, the land, the people, the plants and the animals, the sky, the moon, and the sun. Early on, plants and animals were people too, but slowly they evolved into the way that we know them today. For thousands of years on the western edge of the continent, original peoples and their descendants spent their lives living along the coasts, moving in annual cycles through valleys
Michael, we just lost you. Can you hear me? Michael? Your screen's frozen.
You may be
Can you
back.
hear me?
Whoops.
Yeah,
Are we
you
good
froze.
here? I'm suddenly seeing. Oh, is it all working for you guys? Whoops, am I back?
You're back.
Yeah.
Okay. So computer.
Now you're in the dark.
Oh, no.
He looks frozen again.
Yeah, I think he's, okay, now we see you again.
Okay. And here we go. And you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. So the accumulated experience of hundreds of generations of native Californians interacting with their plants and landscapes, refining and building on that body of knowledge, has sustained native populations for thousands of years in ways that stand in stark contrast to what has happened to the land and the people in the last 2.5 centuries. In spite of these dramatic changes, today, some of the ancient plant knowledge is carried on by the descendants of those who have lived here for so long. We would do well to listen for their wisdom. Ethnobotany, Ethnobotany is the study of the interactions between people and plants. The people I've had the great honor to work with and to know as friends are Kumeyaay, Pai Pai, and Coach people of Baja California. Kumeyaay territory reaches from the north around Escondido in the United States to Santo Tomas, Mexico in the south, from the Pacific Ocean to the Colorado Desert. This territory, the Kumeyaay Nation, was bisected by an international border starting in 1848. Before that time, during the Spanish and Mexican periods, the area south of the present-day border, all the way down to the tip of the peninsula, was called Baja or Antigua, California, meaning lower or old California, as you can see here on this map.
Oh, we're not seeing a shared screen. At least I'm not seeing your presentation.
Oh.
You're not sharing the screen anymore.
Okay, let me try doing something here. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and then I'm gonna, whoops. That's odd. I wonder if I should go back to that link and start over because I'm not seeing. I'm seeing an ad from Zoom.
Michael, you might be able to email your presentation to John and he can share it for you. And you can talk. If that's easier.
So are you going through Zoom on the internet or through the application downloaded to your computer?
I thought I was going through the internet. The one I have on the computer is from my university. Okay.
So
Yeah.
you're on our link through the web page, the Zoom web page?
Yes.
I'm wondering if I'm not sure how that works that well, so.
Okay, I think I've got it. Okay, I just have to stop share. Okay.
There you
Okay,
are.
here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So is that good?
Yeah, we might have missed some of the pictures you had before this, just an FYI. I don't know what you might have had earlier, so.
So did you see that, the Kumeyaay
No.
territory?
No, we
Okay,
didn't see that.
just so you can appreciate that, it's going all the way from the coasts, you know, through the inland valleys up to where Ramona and even Lemon Grove, where you guys are, is a coastally influenced inland valley, I'd say, and then up to the mountains, down to the deserts. So Kumeyaay people had access to all of these different types of habitat. Now, so let's see here. So in the middle of this whole continuum of the Californias, that is Baja California and Alta California, the region along the Pacific coast from Central California well down into Northern Baja California with a Mediterranean type climate forms part of the California Floristic Province, with many similarities in vegetation throughout the region. So let's stop and take a little look at these pictures, because I think there's oh yeah. Well, we can see here some typical examples of like what our coasts used to look like before they were all covered with hotels and houses and things. And some of the other types of vegetation that we would normally find up in, you know, as you're heading up the, say, the 10 or the 8 up going east. And so these are just some really great examples of the kinds of different habitat that we have. And then when we get over to the desert side, we also have very similar types of desert habitat, both on the California and the Baja California side. Many of the plants are the same, and native peoples have, you know, for thousands of years, shared this knowledge of all these different plants. So, and then here's some examples too of some of the plants that I think you might want to consider for both your ornamental gardens and even growing them because they're things that you can eat or use for medicine. Starting on the upper left and going clockwise. Anybody know what that is? The one on the upper left?
Is that buckwheat?
Yep, that's our California buckwheat, which isn't so much of, it's related to buckwheat that we eat, but that's an Eurasian crop. This buckwheat is more of a medicine. It's really good if you have a digestive upset, and it's just calming in general for our body. So a small amount of the flower leaves, it's kind of astringent, but I've used that before for digestive problems. Going clockwise from there in the upper right, yerba santa, also a wonderful medicinal herb. There are many different types of yerba santa that grow throughout our region. And I like to just take some of the leaves, dry them, and carry them with me if I get like a cough or something. It's really good for calming down a cough. Then this on the lower right, anybody know what that is?
Yerba Santa. That's the, they call it the taco plant, right? I can't remember the name of it.
That, yeah, on the lower left would be what they sometimes call taco plant. On the lower right with all the berries.
Oh.
Lemonade.
Good guess, good guess. That's toyon. Sometimes,
Okay.
sometimes called Hollywood or Christmas berry.
Christmas.
Anyway, the toyon, also native people eat those berries, but like many native foods, you have to process it. So you have to somehow heat them up and they lose their astringency that way. But there was something that people ate quite a bit of, and maybe some people continue eating those today. On the lower left is what, yeah, is sometimes called taco plant. That's also known as laurel sumac. That's one of the most common shrubs you'll find all over San Diego County. And that's a woman's medicine. It can provoke uterine contractions. So if women are giving birth and they're having problems, they'll give them a tea of that. And that helps the baby come out, or the afterbirth if that hasn't come down. So it's also a really useful plant. I think of all of these, one that I'd really recommend for your gardens is this toyon. It's a plant that after, like most of these, it takes maybe a year or two to get them established. You don't want to overwater them, but they're don't need much water after that. Sometimes you can give them a little extra water, they'll grow faster, but you don't want them to rot out either. So the toyon in a small yard, you know, where you don't have room for a great huge tree, it can be pruned up into a beautiful small tree. And then it does have the advantage that you can even eat those berries.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Very nice plant.
Birds like berries too.
Yeah, the birds love them for sure.
Awesome.
So
Can I just ask real quick, how does that do? How much sun does that kind of toyo need?
they pretty much grow in full sun, although they often start off in the shade of other plants. So they can take some mixed shade throughout the day, but you'd want in the end for them to have pretty much full sun. So as you can see here, this is the heart of Kumeyaay territory. It's Mount Kuchuma or Takati Peak over by Takati, a sacred peak for the Kumeyaay people. And sadly, the international border runs right through the middle of all that. So it's kind of separated Kumeyaay people from both sides, can sometimes affect wildlife corridors too. But as you can see here, the plants have managed to continue thriving on both sides of the border. Now, originally, people south of the border, Kumeyaay people throughout their territory have had different variations of the language. And probably if you had come here 300 or 400 years ago, you would have found that Kumeyaay people living, say, in up by Valley Center or down by Point Loma or up by Lemon Grove, down in Baja, they probably had their own special variants of their language. They also probably knew the plants in their particular area really well. And so while they shared a lot of things in common, a lot of knowledge, each group also had its own special identity. And so we talk about them as though they were one group that was all homogeneous, but we also have learned over time how every different group had their own special identity and ways that they might have painted themselves or tattooed or used plants or things like that that made them special. So today, ethnobotanical knowledge is still commonly practiced. So this was at a workshop at Viejas. We had Jane Dumas from Hamul and some of the folks from Baja and some students from Viejas that were all shelling acorns together. And I loved it that the elders were speaking Kumeyaay. It didn't matter. They didn't have to worry about English or Spanish. They could just communicate just fine in their native language, which of course was around long before English or Spanish. So this common culture that transcends the recently imposed international border forms what I call it in the subtitle of my book, a shared heritage of the Californias. Today, south of the border, many Kumeyaay live in remote ranches where native plants may still be abundant and continue to form an essential part of local economies. Here, Norma Mesa is preparing bladder pod. We'll talk about this in a little bit here. Many of the elders I've worked with over the years grew up speaking only their native language, walking barefoot, getting their water from a creek, and living in homes made from local plants. And here Teodora Cuero is collecting manzanita berries. Manzanitas, which are a little hard to grow, they take a long time, but they are just beautiful and edible. Some of these folks' grandparents remembered stories of missionaries, soldiers, and marauding Colorado River Indian tribes. They've been extremely poor and faced countless hardships, but at the same time, their native culture and knowledge of the land often helped them survive. Many of the plant specialists I've worked with never had a formal education, but their vast knowledge of plants and every part of the environment never ceases to amaze me. This woman is showing us a skirt, a traditional skirt she made out of yucca fibers. Although many have now passed on, fortunately, new generations of elders and recently more and more younger people have become interested in learning and transmitting plant knowledge. One of the great joys in my life has been the enduring friendships with many of the elders that I've had the opportunity to work with over the last 40 years. People like Teodora Cuero of La Huerta, who passed away in her mid-90s only a few years ago. Teodora was a dear friend, teacher, and a kindred spirit whose joyful and dignified sense of being and profound affection for the land of her ancestors has been an inspiration for many. John Mesa, a traditional singer, and as he described himself, a binational Indian, spent many of his final years mentoring and passing on his knowledge of songs, plants, and other aspects of traditional culture to his students. Celia Silva of San Jose de la Zorra, whose wonderful sense of humor and vast knowledge of plants made visits with her a delight. Okay. Fortunately, some elders like Teresa Castro continue to, continue to pass on their knowledge to future generations in their own communities and at reservations, parks, universities, and other sites in the US and Mexico. A younger generation of up-and-coming elders also continues to keep ethnobotanical knowledge and practice alive through the teaching and ongoing use of native plant foods and medicines, tools, construction materials, and ceremony. Many of this generation are also fluent speakers of their native languages and participate in teaching and research. Kumeyaay, Paipai, and Coat languages spoken in this area are closely related to other native languages of Baja California and Arizona, belonging to a larger family of languages known as the Yuman languages. Once the dominant languages spoken in the region, these languages are now spoken fluently by only a small number of native speakers, many of them living in Baja California. These Yuman languages and their broad extension from the Pacific coast to the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River remind us of the thousands of years of history in this region. Relationships between these languages, such as Kumeyaay and Kukapa, and Paipai and the upland Pai languages, that is Havasu Pai, Wallapai, and Yavapai, remind us of the ancient cultural connections between all these groups. Whoops. During my fieldwork, I had the opportunity to collaborate with many of these native speakers to document plants and their uses in both Kumeyaay language and in Spanish. In many cases, the names of plants are similar or the same throughout this region and can help us reconstruct ancient relationships between native groups. So this plant here, anybody know what this is?
White sage.
Good. Yeah. Now this is
I'm
one
cheating because it says it right next to it. Sorry.
Oh yeah, there you go. That
I would've
helps,
known
doesn't it? I'm cheating.
I wanted to turn myself in.
So the white sage is one that is really being recommended for cultivating in your gardens, whether in your own home garden or in community gardens, so that people are not impacting the wild population so much. So there is quite a debate about wildcrafting or foraging when it's not done in a careful way, or when people are just going out for commercial reasons and, you know, plundering the populations of this plant, which has happened with white sage, because there's a huge demand internationally. They sell this on Alibaba, Amazon. You can buy it by the ton. So, and it all comes from our Southern California, Northern Baja California region. So there, some places the populations are very healthy, but in others, people just come and pull the whole thing out by the roots. So we're really recommending that people try cultivating it. And it's a nice thing to have for your own use. Not only is it good for colds or any kind of congestion in your lungs you might have, or just for a delicious tasting tea. But also the little seeds that it creates can be eaten like chia. And of course, you can burn it for that nice kind of an incense, and it's a wonderful gift to give. But hopefully it's one from some that you have actually cultivated yourselves. So the archaeological record of our region tells the story of how ancient peoples created stone tools like metates to process seeds like bitter acorns and cherry stones and transform them into delicious, nutritious foods. Some Kumeyaay continue to carry on these traditions today. Fragments of cordage, nets, and sandals found in archaeological sites have been dated at over 9,000 years old and are reminders of the ancient origins of traditions carried on today by a few native artisans like Teresa Castro. And I failed to put in here a picture of the agave plant that they get this fiber from, but I think we'll see that a little bit later. Prehistoric basketry, occasionally found in archaeological sites, also reminds us that native peoples from throughout the Southern California and Baja California region have long been producing baskets made from local plant materials for processing and storage of plant foods. Split juncus coil basketry, strong, useful, and durable, is also part of the shared cultural heritage of the Californias. That is, people make this type of basketry in both Southern California, all the way up to the Chumash region and down into Baja. Today's basket makers create an astounding variety of beautifully crafted designs and shapes, using the same basic techniques passed on from their grandmothers. In Baja California, these baskets are made primarily in the Kumeyaay community of San Jose de la Zorra, using two types of juncus, native plant found in creeks and wetlands of the region. So as you can see here, there's one type of juncus that's made into those long strands that are going down to the right. That's called the foundation of the basket. And then that one long strand that goes up to the right is called the weaver, and that's made from a different kind of juncus, which we'll look at both of those. So this is the one that's used for the foundation of the baskets. It's called spiny rush. And you may have had an encounter with this if you like to hike and you get too close to it. It is kind of spiny on the end. And then this is the other type that's used to make that little weaver. It has to be really strong and flexible. And it also has the advantage that those nice dark brown bases of the plants can be used to make those beautiful designs you saw earlier. Now, another plant that's really useful is the willow. We always think of in gardening of a weeping willow, which is actually not a native kind of willow, but we have many different types of native willows. And one of the native willows, or a few different types that we have, red willow, black willow, arroyo willow, can be made into these beautiful granaries, which are used for storing acorns. And you can see how ingenious it is that they've created this way of weaving together the branches so that it'll hold in literally hundreds of pounds of acorns and keep bugs and other critters out. So the development of pottery over the last 1,000 years also provided Native Californians with more options for processing and storing of plant materials. The dried stalks of Mojave yucca, one of our 2 types of native yucca, proved to be an ideal material for firing pottery. This plant, this native Mojave yucca, the blossoms can also be eaten. It produces sort of a banana-like fruit. It looks like a little mini banana, which can also be dried and made into something like a, excuse me, a dried fruit. And then the stalk of the yucca has saponins or soap-like compounds. So that's what yucca shampoo is made out of, this type of a yucca. Cooking, toasting, soaking, storage, and other uses of pottery have allowed the Kumeyaay to use their plant resources more intensively and in an ever wider number of ways. So this pottery probably came into our area about 1,000 years ago, probably from the Colorado River area. And once pottery came in, there were a lot more ways people could use the native plants. I mean, imagine how would you cook a mush if you didn't have a pot? So people in many parts of California where they don't have pottery would use hot stones, red hot stones in special type of basketry. But it really changed things once there was pottery available, made it possible for people to use their plants even more, and it probably allowed populations to rise. The arrival of the Spanish in the region beginning in 1540 and starting permanent colonization in about 1769, really not that long ago in terms of how long humans have lived here, drastically affected the Kumeyaay and their relationships with their environments. The introduction of foreign diseases, livestock ranching, and agriculture would forever change the Kumeyaay way of life. Because bear in mind, before this time, agriculture as we know it didn't exist. People were interacting with their native plants in a way that could be considered as a form of plant husbandry. But they weren't clearing land to plant crops and setting up whole irrigation systems. So it turns out, if we want to think about sustainability in our region, this was the most sustainable way for people to live for thousands of years. Think about what we've done to the land in just a couple of 100 years. No longer able to freely move throughout their traditional territories, many of them eventually took up a more sedentary way of life. The Kumeyaay found ways to transform their world while maintaining traditional knowledge that helped them survive. The shared heritage of plant knowledge has continued to provide food, medicine, tools, construction materials, and ceremonial items. Now, speaking about things that we can grow or that we can find all around us, on the left, you'll see a picture of, anybody know what that is?
An Oya?
The one hanging from the roof. It's the flowers of something that actually, if you go to Sprouts, you'll see it in their, good try.
Amaranth?
Sorry?
Amaranth?
Nope. Elderberry.
Oh, elderberry.
Elderberry.
Elderberries
So,
grown here.
yeah, these are elderberry flowers. They're blooming right now. So you can cut them and they have a wonderful scent, but they're also great medicine for a cold, for a fever. During COVID time, a lot of people were using this, and yerba santa and white sage, things like that. So today in their lands in Baja California have been reduced to a fraction of their original territories. They're located in 4 federally recognized communities. Although these communities usually have a central village, many people travel seasonally to remote ranches or outposts. Fortunately, these communities are located in different ecosystems. So between them all, there still exists an extensive knowledge of a variety of plants and ecosystems. So here we're just seeing, this is off to the side of the Guadalupe Valley, which is now Baja's wine country. But you can see there's even pine trees up on the top of this mountain. This is not far from the border, Tecate area, Cottonwood Creek, sort of south of, well, where Tecate is. This is closer to the coast, San Jose de la Zorra, where those amazing basket makers live. So the heart of my book is a listing of 47 plants and their uses. And that part of it might be interesting for people who are, wanting to know more about the specific plants and how they can be used. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of how this works, I go through the plants and I give their English and Spanish names, and also their names in Kumeyaay, in case you're interested. And then, and talk about some of the ways that these are used. Now, if you like to go hiking in the springtime, you probably encounter this beautiful plant, Diclostoma. Now, it turns out that this plant grows all through the Californias, and it's a wonderful example of how traditional management of these plants actually affected how the plant populations grew. Because you might think, well, they're digging these plants up and eating them, that's going to sooner or later be the end of these plant populations. But what we can see here is a great example. The collectors, the native folks who are collecting these and harvesting these, tell us that they collect the larger ones, they call the mamas, and the babies, they detach and then leave there. You can see how there's a little tiny strand. Once they're detached, then they'll start growing up into a larger plant. So where you saw one plant, when you dug it up and then covered it up, made a little hole there for the water to drain down into, when you come back next year, you might have 5 or 10 plants. So imagine this impact on the plant populations over thousands of years, and what a profound impact that had on what we often think of as wild or pristine habitat. It actually has been tended in many ways by native people for thousands of years. This is another plant, and one that I would highly recommend for having in your gardens if you do have a place that has a little more moisture, because yerba mansa, as it's called, or lizard's tail, tends to grow in wetland areas. Now, this is a great medicinal plant. It's beautiful too, but just you can smell the leaves or the roots, and they have this great kind of a sarsaparilla scent to them. It's a natural antibiotic, antiseptic. You can use the roots, the leaves, the flowers. Every part has a different use to it. I go through some of those in my book. Basically, I'm just quoting what the people told me about that. And one of the things that they've told me is you do need to also educate yourself and learn. And many of these plants are very powerful, have powerful substances in them. So you don't want to overdo it. You want to start off with a small amount and see how it affects your body. Now, this is the bladder pod. It's one of my favorite plants. It wasn't even on my radar before I started doing this work, but it's one that the Kumeyaay just love. They call it pshash in Kumeyaay, and it will continue to bloom about 6 months out of the year. They'll nip off just the tip of this, the flowering tip, and collect a whole bunch of those and boil them up. And they have a funny sort of almost like a petroleum smell to them, but you boil them, throw the water off a couple of times, and then at the end, it tastes sort of like cooked cabbage. Whoops. You can see here's how some of the Norma Mason, her sister Yolanda, are gathering these, and They'll cook them up, as you can see here. And one of the ladies that I worked with, Teodora, one time when I went to visit her, she said, here, eat these burritos made with this pshash. And she said, you won't need to eat anything else the rest of the day. And it's true, I did. I think it'd be a great diet food because it sustained me for the whole rest of the day. Now, another plant that I think we should also consider for our yards. It's maybe a little too big for a garden plot, but for an ornamental plant that's also edible is hollyleaf cherry. And the hollyleaf cherry is related to all your hard seed fruits like apricot, almond. In fact, the gruel they make out of this, or the porridge, has kind of an almondy flavor. You can eat the nice fruit on the outside, but really the treasure trove of nutrition on this are these kernels on the inside, which they will grind. Well, they'll eat the fruit and then save all these little kernels and then break them open, winnow them, get them, separate them as they grind them, and then keep grinding them into a smaller and smaller meal, and then leach them. You have to leach with a water that's a certain temperature because it has cyanide in it. So you have to know how to get that cyanide out. Again, you need to know what you're doing. But if you leach it several times, then it will remove that cyanide, and it's a delicious pudding like this, kind of almondy flavor. So that's another one. I wouldn't really recommend doing that on your own, but we need to bring some of the Kumeyaay up and learn from them about how to make this. The acorns also from our oak trees are another great source of food. Oak tree, as you probably know, is pretty big for your average garden. If you have room, it might be a good idea to plant it because we never know what's going to happen in the world. People have survived for a long time on this. And so we might want to pay attention to how we can eat those acorns. These are called bitter acorns. They have a lot of tannic acid in them. So they do have to be very well ground and then leached. Some of my Kumeyaay friends went to one of these grinding stones and kind of showed us how to do that process, all the way from the grinding to the leaching. And then the final product is this kind of a yellow porridge that they'll eat by itself or along with, say, venison or rabbit or something like that. So we did see this earlier. This is Teodora gathering the manzanitas. And manzanita can be also, they'll moisten it, let it soak for a little while, and then kind of pound it to get rid of the really hard seeds that they remove. And then all that pulpy part can be made into kind of a cider. So manzanita, of course, in Spanish means little apples, and it does have sort of an appley flavor. And speaking of apples, cactus apples, nopal, another plant that has so many uses, and that if we want to talk about sustainability, this is one that really needs no irrigation. Many hundreds of varieties of these. And of course, from the fruit to the cactus pads, as we can see in the lower left here, all of those things are edible. But again, you need to know what you're doing. You have to know how to gather those. We already talked some about the toyon, a great plant for your gardens. Now, a native plant to Baja California that I really love, and I use it in a lot of my landscaping, is the blue palm, the Mexican blue. Look at that amazing color that it has. In the background are California fan palms. Those are like the fan palms that grow up by Palm Springs and Anza Borrego, those areas. And they coexist here with the blue palm, the Brahea armata, which also has a little date kind of a thing that can be eaten. But they're another plant. They're very slow growing, but they are really rewarding. I have about 20 of these here in my garden, and I just love them. So here's the California fan palm. Different from the Washingtonia robusta, the one that's so common in San Diego, LA, the one that grows really tall, looks like a phone pole, a little poof on top. And this one has a much larger trunk, the California native fan palm. And you can see all those little berries that it have. They're like little dates. Those can be made into kind of a molasses that's quite delicious too. Kauai people up by Palm Springs, what's now Palm Springs, and Kumeyaay and others that lived out on the like Anza Borrego area used these quite a bit. And again here, the buckwheat, California buckwheat, you can see how it turns to that beautiful kind of brick red color. So I think in gardens, this is something that we can learn to use. And many of the native plants, if we learn how to work with them, we can find ways to keep them from getting too rangy in our gardens. You know, naturally they would be burned every few years. And so that would burn them back down, but then they sprout back up. And so I just prune mine down when they start looking rangy, and I've never lost one. They always come back. They seem to like the pruning. Another plant that I'd recommend for your gardens is a jojoba. And although it's tempting to eat these, and you can eat a few, but they're not digestible. And I make sometimes, I roast them like you would coffee and make a drink out of it. But the oil in it is actually a wax that's not digestible by humans. So as it goes in, so it will come out. And then one of my favorites for the garden is the Dudleya, or live forever, also known as stone crop. It's our native succulent. There are many different varieties. This is another one that's been suffering from plundering. Literally tons of this have been just ripped out of the hills and sent like to Asia, where collectors buy them. So we encourage you not to just run out in the hills and pull them out, but find some of the nurseries around where you can buy these that have been grown from seed. And they are really nice to grow in your garden. They really don't need any extra water. If they get a little bit, they'll be very happy with that. But I have a lot of these in my garden, and man, they're just beautiful, and they look great on a full moon night too. So I brought this picture in of what we call San Diego sunflower, Bachyopsis, because this is another one that I've been experimenting with. We'll see them in the hills around, but as soon as the rains are gone, it dries up and looks very dead. But in my garden, anywhere where I have a little extra water, they will just keep going and going. In fact, often I have to cut them way down, and then they just come right back up and keep blooming. So again, these are things that I think they are very gracious about wanting to grow here and giving us all their beautiful colors, and maybe not edible, but you know, beauty is something that we humans need too. So finally, a couple of slides, just wanted to show you, I mentioned the agave fiber that was used for making string and nets. We have two kinds of native agaves in our region. On the left are the coastal agaves. They have sort of short, squat leaves. They're beautiful also, you know, very spiny, but beautiful for landscaping. And on the right are desert agave. You'll see these as you go down toward Ocotillo, of course, on all those hillsides there. Not only were they a good source of fiber, but when they're just about to bloom, they could be cut off, harvested by native people, and made into kind of something like a sweet potato that you could eat. So they were an important source of food for native people from throughout the region. So I've talked on long enough. I'd be very happy to take any of your questions if anybody wants to ask about any of this or make comments.
I'm sorry, I was a little distracted. You said the last plant was a good source of food?
The agaves, yeah. They're related to the big blue agave that's much more common probably in Lemon Grove and in your area. Those come from central Mexico.
How are those eaten?
Well, when they're, you probably have seen the big, huge blue agaves when they send up those shoots, right? That go about 35 feet in the air. And
Yeah.
they bloom and they'll be covered with bees and hummingbirds and things. Well, and they're sometimes called century plant, right? Because we have sort of this idea that they bloom once a century, but maybe it'll take 20, 30 years to bloom. But what they do is they store up all of their energy throughout their life cycle for this one act of reproduction, which is to bloom. And people throughout central Mexico and the southwestern United States, where there are different varieties of agave, they figured out that at that moment when the stalk is just starting to rise up above the level of the leaves, the plant is just chock full of sugars. And so they would cut it down at that point and roast it in an earth oven, usually have a big fire with lots of rocks that get heated up, and then put all the agaves, mix those in with the rocks and cover it up with sand, and come back after 2 or 3 days and it's all been cooked. And that's the basis for what in Mexico is called pulque and eventually becomes tequila in Mexico. And in our area and throughout the Southwest, people were just eating those stalks as food. I don't have a picture of it here, but it's sort of like eating a sweet potato, but with more fiber.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Any other questions?
You know, I did, luckily, recently I had got a bunch of native seed from a seed exchange program from the Audubon Society, and some of it was bladder pod.
Great.
And also manzanita and white
Great.
sage, which I don't know if you could see on the video when you were speaking, but I was sitting right next to a giant white sage patch, which was fun. It was kind of ironic. It was like, hey, here I am sitting next to this wild sage that he's talking about. But anyway, so with the bladder pod, now, should I grow that up on my hill? I get like partial sun on the hill. So that's why I was asking the same question earlier about the toyon, because I want to know where to. I have some natives already on the hillside that are doing pretty good, some coffee berry and stuff. But I was wondering, should I put the bladder pod down farther in the garden here where I have full sun all day?
I usually see bladder pod. I see it growing on hills, but usually in full sun.
Oh, okay.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
sadly, it's under a pepper tree.
Yeah. Probably you could try some there. If you have a few seeds, they tend to germinate pretty well.
Okay.
So try maybe 1 or 2 on the hill, but then have some in full sun. And again, they will bloom and just bring you lots of yellow joy.
Awesome. Yeah, it looked delicious. I can't wait to try it.
Yeah.
And where is your book, like, available on Amazon or something? I'm assuming, like everything on Earth.
Yes, it is on Amazon. I'd suggest trying to buy it through Sunbelt Publications, which is right here in El Cajon. They're the publishers, and rather than supporting a big monster.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I'd rather go to buy that in El Cajon. That's where I want to do everything. I don't want to buy anything from Amazon. I was just wondering.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked, because a lot of people just go to Amazon, but you can get it right from Sunbelt, and they'll send it to you. It should be at Mission Trails. Yeah, they have it at Mission. Yeah, it's about
All
$30.
for the Mission Trails. Yeah, that's right. I've got some seeds from there too.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
San Diego Natural History Museum carries it. I think Torrey Pines.
Yeah, and also SDG&E, not to promote giant evil, but they have a seed bank at their location in Century Park too. So they're trying to do good things, you know?
Yeah. Well, let's focus on the good part.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree.
Michael, I assume that the native people figured out what to do with these different plants and flowers and stuff by trial and error. Yeah.
Mhm. Right.
I have the same question.
John,
And
you're
that's-
talking too loud.
That's the most asked question that I get, because it's sort of amazing. How did people figure all this stuff out? And so I've asked many of my native friends about that, and they say, well, you know, we watched the animals and we watched what they were eating. We tried things. It's often with this idea that you try a little bit, and if that doesn't kill you, you can try more. One example of about acorns that I thought was interesting is up in Northern California, where they actually have rivers. People told me that once in a while they'll find an acorn in the river, and then it's been leached by sitting in the river for a long time. And some places they'll even put a bag like those nets that I showed you full of acorns right in the water, just leave it for, you know, a few days and it'll get leached. So they probably noticed those things and then just figured out how to process it on their own. So I think the main answer to that question is, and it's something that's hard for us to understand because most of our ancestors have only been here, you know, 2, 3, 4 generations, 5. And so, and our ancestors generally didn't interact with the land so closely. So, but they did that. That's how they survived for thousands of years. So anything that people learned that was useful or good, they would, I'm sure, pass on, including management. I mean, including how you manage those populations in ways that don't decimate them, but actually encourage those plant populations to grow more.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the elder that passed, I forgot her first name, but her last name is Cuero. Was
Yeah.
she related to or descended from Delfina Cuero?
Delfina was her aunt.
Okay,
Isn't that amazing?
yeah, well, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So if any of you haven't seen that, the autobiography of Delfina Cuero is one of the most important books for understanding Kumeyaay life in San Diego area. And she also has the later editions of that book have a list of ethnobotanical contributions by Delfina Cuero. And Delfina was from the Point Loma Mission Valley area, but her family slowly got pushed out and she eventually ended up marrying a man in Baja.
Mhm.
And so she also lived in Baja, California for many years.
Thank you.
Is her people at the mission trails also?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Michael, I really enjoyed your presentation, and I think your point about Native Americans living in harmony with their environment rather than, you know, subduing it, changing it, ruining it. I think it's a good lesson that hopefully we can take some of that ability to live in harmony and keep some of the modern advancements. I like the idea that we can infuse our culture with different cultures and grow from it. And I think that's a very important lesson, is to work with the land rather than destroy it. And I also, I'm sure you've seen this book, The Indians of the Oaks. That was my introduction to Native American plants in the area.
Sure.
Delightful book.
Great book. Yeah. I think a lot of school kids, that's their first introduction.
And, you know, I don't look at it as just a kid's book. I look at it as for adults too, because it's a
Yeah.
delightful book. It's a wonderful story about a kid who lives with the Native Americans in this area, but it's also an insight into, you know, their relationships with each other and the earth.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, for mentioning that. And I also wanted to mention, I think those are two important books, two of the most important books, Delfina Cuero and Indians of the Oaks. But I also wanted to mention where you can get, you may know this, but some of the nurseries where you can get native plants in your area would be Native West, formerly Recon, down by San Isidro. You all know about that place?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Probably
City
the,
Farmers, I think, has a lot of interesting books in their area too.
And plants, do they have native plants?
They have a ton of native plants. Yeah,
Great.
I got my coffee berry there, and
Great.
another one called copper leaf there too.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, they have a lot of different sage. I got some black sage. They have a great selection there.
Oh, and I meant to mention that too, that we know the white sage, but I love the black sage, and that's another one that once it's established doesn't need any extra water. And for me,
Yeah.
it's one of my favorites for using a very small amount in cooking. Has a
Yeah,
great
you know what?
flavor.
I've been using it in my kombucha recently also.
Mm,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, no, it's a good one.
I heard that native or wild plants are more potent medicinally than, let's say, cultivated plants. Can you lend a little more insight as to why that is exactly? And if you start cultivating a native, when does it become officially cultivated and lose that potency?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's really true, because the interesting thing about cultivation is that humans select for certain things, qualities that they want in plants. And so in some cases, we may have selected for plants, like what are the classic medicinal plants from Europe would be like rosemary and things like that. They may have selected for them, but whether it was for medicine or for their ornamental use, if once we start selecting for the ornamental part, then they might not be as great medicinally. But another plant that I should mention that you probably all know that is great both ornamentally and I like it for a spice is Cleveland sage, which right now is just full of beautiful lavender purple blooms. That's one that also does, and there are many cultivars of that. So, hybrids that are made for growing in gardens. So since they've been selected for, say, blooming, they might not have as potent an herbal or the alkaloids or whatever is in it that's medicinal. So I think it really depends on what we're selecting for. And probably a lot of the medicinal plants, probably the reason we have that idea is that very often they're selected for, to be beautiful in a garden. And the ones that are out in the hills are probably more the real basic plant. I remember one of my native friends saying that he actually likes to gather them when they're not in the springtime when they're full of water, but rather when they're a little drier, because it's more concentrated.
I see.
And of course, many of our native gatherers are also very careful about their attitude, and even doing some kind of a prayer or blessing or thank you kind of ritual when they are gathering plants. It's not just go and take and run, but it's actually being appreciative toward the plant. And Teodora, when she would say a prayer, she would thank the plant, and she would tell the plant, her or him, how she was going to use it, and say that she hoped to come back and visit it again.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mike. I think that was just a wonderful presentation, and I'm sure people probably have more questions, and maybe could we, if they send me questions, can we maybe email them to you?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm sure we have a lot more we could talk about, but I think it is starting to get a little late in the hour here. So, but I want to thank you for taking the time to join us, our garden community, and others that have joined us, and hopefully some of us will get your book and learn a lot more that there is to know about this whole topic. I've already gotten your book, and I really enjoyed it. It's an amazing, beautiful book. So, I want to wish and thank everybody for joining us tonight and sharing with Michael what he has to offer us. And anybody else has closing remarks?
Yeah, thank
please.
you for including us, for
Thank you,
arranging
Ann.
this.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
We
thanks a
also
lot.
have,
Knowledge.
thank you all. We also have another workshop coming up on Saturday at 10 a.m. On tree canopies and really utilizing them to do some more urban cooling. So if folks are available, we'd love to have you.
I
you.
was struck by what you said about saying thank you to the plant and saying I would come back and visit it again, because it took me from a different paradigm, which is seeing the plant as for its utilitarian value or for its beauty as an object, to seeing it as a friend. So it's sort of like an I-thou relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really beautiful part of see, yeah, the way that our attitude changes. And then we see all that plants relatives everywhere we go, and it helps us feel more rooted in this land and appreciative for people who've taken care of it for so long.
I agree.
Well, with
Feels
that
really good.
wonderful, yeah, that's a wonderful sentiment to end. And we recorded this, so we're going to make this available to people who weren't able to make it tonight. We'll post it online so more people can enjoy this lecture. So, well, good night, everybody, and have a
Good
great
night.
rest of the evening.
Thank you,
Right.
Mike.
Thank
Too.
you. Nice to meet you all.
You
Nice meeting you. Good
too.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye.
Have a good one, John. See you
Okay,
soon.
bye, Sean.
Take
That
care.
was Wonderful.
Bye, John. Bye, Sean.
Hi, Don.
Is that John Mishno?
Yeah.